Hello, I'm Anna Massoud, the Director General of the International Council of Design, or ICoD as we like to call it. Today we're presenting a short primer on spec competitions that I hope will convince designers that this practice is not only exploitative and unfair, but that it's not in the interest of designers to be in any way affiliated with them. For those of you who do not know us, the International Council of Design is a world body for professional design representing 124 organizations in 48 countries. Founded as Icograda in 1963, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan, member-based network of independent organizations and stakeholders working within the multidisciplinary scope of design. Our organization is often asked to speak out against different kinds of unethical design competitions. It started to become clear to us recently that a certain type of speculative design competition is becoming more and more common. As these practices become normalized, a whole new generation of designers are being exposed without realizing the unfortunate consequences. Today, we strive to give a concise analysis of what defines a spec competition so that it can be easily identified, and to break down some of the reasons why this practice is frowned upon by professional associations such as ours and our members. First, let's start with the name. The term spec comes from speculative practice, which is design work provided for free, for a nominal fee, or for the possibility of payment, often in competition with peers as a means to solicit new business. Let me be clear that when we are saying that some design competitions are unethical, we're not talking about most competitions. Traditional design competitions have a few characteristics that distinguish them from spec practice. The most important is that they recognize existing work. So most competitions that you'll know of and be familiar with are competitions that accept submissions of work that designers have already done. They've worked with a client, they've been remunerated, and they're submitting work that's already finished for these competitions to look at them and determine which are the better ones and promote the value of the good designing and the value of good designers. One important thing about these competitions is that they're good for the industry in the sense that they evaluate the value of design. If you want to know more about these, we actually have a best practice paper on organizing design award competitions, which you can look up on our website under resources. Another term that we'd like to define today is design challenge. This word has actually been, in our opinion, misused quite a bit by speculative competitions. But in the traditional sense, a challenge is a community and skills building exercise that's either between designers or between designers and a nonprofit. An example of designer to designer would be if graphic designers got together and said, we're going to make 10 logos in 10 days, and they got together, critiqued each other, honed their skills, and kind of built a sense of community around this activity, which in the end was, kind of for fun. An example of direct to nonprofit is if, for instance, let's say an INGO needs to solve a real problem like filtering water in a portable way and reaches out to a bunch of industrial designers to apply their skill set to try to solve this problem. This type of challenge often has designers working with each other and not against each other. But really what makes a design challenge and not a competition is that there's no possibility for commercial benefit. We're not looking to have a final logo design or a final produced manufactured product that's going to be sold. This brings us to the topic of the primer today. So what we're calling spec competitions is from Speculative that I defined earlier, are design competitions asking designers for new work, i.e. to provide design services for free or for the potential of payment. These are also called crowdsourced design. The International Council of Design discourages all practices that engage designers in any kind of speculative, uncompensated work, including competitions of a speculative nature. Why do we stand against these practices? Well, for two reasons. First, it devalues the professional quality of the designing itself, the quality of the design. And second, it devalues design as a professional service. When we're talking about the quality of design, the conditions of speculative practice preclude the possibility of a complete design process. So you can't really run through a proper design methodology in a situation of a competition. Without the structured interaction between client and designer, or between the designer and potential users, an important part of the process is cut out. So for instance, part of the initial research and discovery phase is eliminated. Solutions can only be superficially sought out and considered without sufficient understanding of the client needs in this situation. Moreover, the cost of speculative practices and uncompensated work means that insufficient time, energy, and consideration will be invested in each project, as the studios need to create more and more pitches to assure that their costs are covered by the work that they are compensated for. This inevitably brings down the quality of the design work that is produced. And when I'm talking about the value of professional services, designers need to realize that as representatives of their profession, their personal decisions, what they consider to be personal decisions, impact not only the long-term viability and reputation of their own practices, but it also reflects on the collective standing of the profession. As these speculative practices proliferate, clients will learn to seek out more and more free work. This drives down the going rate for design work and diminishes the perceived value of the design service. There's no benefit neither to the design community or to the client in commodifying design in this way. Some arguments that we sometimes hear for this type of activity is, for instance, that this practice is common in architecture. And yes, design and architecture are similar, but we don't feel that these two things should be compared. First, architects don't actually submit finished projects to these competitions. They're asked to submit preliminary concepts, not finished plans. Comparatively, for logo competitions, for instance, designers are actually asked to submit a finished logo, not a concept or a preliminary idea for a logo. Secondly, in architecture, those pitching are not individuals. Architecture studios budget for these pitching costs. The industry is structured around this way of working, and the costs of the concept design are already included in the pricing structures of the work. This isn't the case in design. Another argument that sometimes come up is that it's for a good cause, so probably it's worth doing. So let's discuss pro bono design for a minute. The council defines pro bono design as professional design work contributed by the designer for a good cause. We strongly encourage that designers give back to their communities, and this is a very valid way to do it. But in order to meet the minimum standard for pro bono design work, it must first be design work, good design work. And we maintain that crowdsourced design does not meet this criteria, as we discussed earlier. The methodology we're not able to go through it in this process. If a legitimate organization wishes to have professional design services donated, they can work with a designer to obtain a donation of the services by doing, for instance, a call for interest. If this is done, the precise working relationship between the designer and the recipient should nonetheless be carefully determined, just as it would with a traditional compensated design project. The conditions of unremunerated work, including the ownership rights, should be adhered to strictly, and the value of the design services, this is quite important, should be communicated clearly. Even if there will not be a billing for the total amount of these services, the designer should make clear what the service is worth. To give you an example of the current situation, we recently were contacted by an INGO planning a logo competition. They thought that making a spec competition would be, in their words, participative. When we suggested that they make a call to ask who would be willing to work pro bono on this instead, they informed us that in fact, they did have the funds to pay for a designer. They had the required budget to make a professional logo, but they preferred what they called engagement that they would get from a logo contest. This gives us an idea of to what degree design itself is misunderstood, but also the general perception by the public of design award competitions, of spec competitions, and how acceptable they are. The idea of a competition where one designer, the winner, would work for a good cause and all the other submitters would simply work for nothing is not only terribly wasteful, but ultimately demeaning to our profession. Let's get back to what I was saying earlier about design challenges. Sometimes spec competitions masquerade as something else. It's starting to be common to have design challenges that are in fact spec competitions. How do you recognize them? Well, if there's a corporate entity involved, it's probably spec. The organizers of these contests are after a few things: free work, new ideas, and the PR buzz that's created by the contest. Every submission and click and like and share adds value for the corporate organizer. They're preying on the desperation of individual designers to be recognized to create social media buzz for their own brand. Recently, we spoke out against one of these so-called challenges by the corporate giant Adobe in partnership with recording artist Billie Eilish. They were looking for designs for her tour merchandise. It was called a challenge, but what they were asking for were designers to submit propositions for actual designs for tour merchandise that would be produced and sold. The proceeds from the sale of the merchandise would go to charity, but the designers were not being compensated, save the winner, of course. This is not behavior that we as a design community should accept. As long as designers submit work to these competitions, they will continue to thrive. If designers expect to be able to charge adequately for their services, they must treat their own time as valuable. As long as there are thousands of designers willing to work for free or for the possibility of exposure, clients will wonder why they are paying for design at all. In normalizing the non-payment of design services, spec competitions are eroding the perceived value of design services. Their gain is our loss as an industry. This is why designers shouldn't submit work. In taking these stances publicly, the council has received comments from individual designers saying things like, well, if I want to develop my own business by submitting work to contests for exposure, it's my business. But this isn't actually the case. I don't know if you're familiar with the notion of the tragedy of the commons. This is something that's usually discussed in sustainability. The tragedy of the commons is a situation in which individual users who have an open access to a resource, in this case, our professional, the reputation of our profession, act independently according to their own self-interest and contrary to the common good of all users, causing the depletion of the resource through their uncoordinated action. In other words, as designers, we should all behave in the way we would want all designers to behave, and therefore must consider the sustainability of our practices to the profession as a whole. To uphold the professional standing of design worldwide, it is necessary to have a shared professional ethos and a sense of common cause. For the message, design is professional work that must be paid for professionally, to take hold, the industry as a whole must be consistent in upholding this message and supporting professional conduct. It goes without saying that professional associations and promotional bodies of design should not support or participate in these contests or sit on their juries. Educational institutions can offer support through the teaching of professional practice and ethics in their schools and educating their students to refuse to submit work to crowdsourced or spec design competitions. But designers must do their part. They are the ones who, through their daily actions, define the industry norms. It's the position of the council that design is a professional service. In order to be considered professionals, designers must behave to a common standard and uphold a set of professional codes. There is benefit to enjoying the reputation of professionalism, credibility, and trust that converts into standards of payment. But there are responsibilities too. Each designer in their everyday contacts with client and industry is building the reputation of the profession as a whole. This is why the proliferation of spec competitions is so damaging. The Adobes of this world have a wide reach among both the general public and young designers. The normalization of this devaluing design work has a negative impact on how design services are valued and perceived and ultimately paid for. As a council representing design professionals, we strongly urge that designers not participate in these competitions and speak out against these practices. If these companies start to have negative responses from designers, they will find other ways to promote themselves. If you do see a spec competition, consider reaching out to your local professional association to ask them to intervene. For international contests, you can contact us. If you want to read more about any of the notions I spoke about today, about speculative practice, about best practices for design award competitions, about our stance on unpaid, unremunerated work, on codes of professional conduct for designers, I encourage you to visit our website. The International Council of Design website is ICoD.org. If you have questions about any of these professional practice issues, you can also send us an email at info@theicod.org. Thank you. This has been a primer on spec competitions from the International Council of Design.